Hey everyone, today we're going to be doing, I think, a really interesting video going over different ways of configuring a AK pattern rifle, whether that be an AK-47, AK-74 base rifle, all the way from the super classic Niet rifle is fine, more or less, all the way up into the more modern alpha, what we see going on around the world type configurations. So we're going to be going over the pros and cons of each setup, what makes some better than others, and how you can possibly set up your rifle in a way that makes it a better fighting rifle. And that's going to be what our focus is on today. If you're trying to build a clone rifle, that's totally fine. That is definitely your prerogative to do. However, the goal with this video is to be setting something up as a fighting rifle. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a long time, you know that a fighting rifle in my mind has a minimum of 3 things, and that is going to be a light, a sling, and an optic. The sling is going to allow it to stay on your body. It is like a holster to a handgun. A light is going to help you identify your target positively, especially if we're talking about a home defense tool or a property defense tool. You need to 100% positively identify what it is you're shooting at before pulling that trigger. And then an optic is generally just going to make it a little bit easier for you to use that rifle in whatever capacity you're going to be doing, whether that mean for longer range positive identification or more precise shots, or just being able to quickly and easily pick up your sights with something like a red dot. So we're going to go ahead and jump straight in with the classic configuration. Now the rifle that I have in front of you here, this is a Century Arms BFT-47, and again, this is going to be standing in our classic Niet rifle is fine. Now obviously you can see that this gun does not have my 3 minimum things. It does have a sling, but it is missing an optic and a light. Now, depending on whether or not you agree with me on what the minimum items required by a rifle are, and I'll also just throw out, I apologize, we are on a live range. We're doing our best to get some clean audio for you, but that's just the reality of what we're dealing with today. But anyway, if you don't agree with me as far as what a fighting rifle needs at a minimum, obviously this is all you need. Great, happy for you. But let's go ahead and, before we talk about how we can add those things to this rifle, let's go ahead and talk about the pros and cons. So first of all, with pros, this is likely going to be one of the cheapest configurations of a rifle like this. In the specific instance of this BFT-47, at least at the time of making this video, you can get these for around $800. Out of the box, it's going to have some really nice features like an enhanced safety selector and also a relatively beefed up rifle, along with having an optic rail. All of that included, and this rifle has been very, very reliable for me. It's just been a super, super solid rifle. Obviously, this is just a stand-in though. You can get a lot of rifles in this base configuration from American companies like Century Arms, Palmetto State Armory, etc. You can also get imports from companies like Zastava or Wassers from Romania, or a bunch of other options as well. Now, the cons of something like this is going to require the most work and leave you with the fewest possible options for aftermarket upgrades, at least without requiring you to sink a considerable amount of investment into it. So for example, if your rifle doesn't come with the optic rail on the side, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to do what we're about to talk about. There are going to be options for you, but it's going to be more difficult. If you wanted to go to a more modern stock, you are going to have to start replacing parts, and you're going to have a limited number of options, unless you want to change that rear trunnion from that regular 2-tang trunnion. Especially if you end up with something like a Zastava, you're going to have a lot fewer options for aftermarket support, just because you're dealing with the proprietary nature of those Serbian pattern rifles. So that is something to take into consideration. Now again, most of those things can be alleviated through investment into good quality aftermarket parts, but again, that's where we're starting. So if you wanted to take a rifle like this and modernize it into a good fighting rifle, it's really very simple. Again, especially if you already have that optic rail on the side. If not, again, we'll talk about an alternative here in a second. So this is a side optic mount. This one specifically is from Midwest Industries, but there are a lot of other options available on the market from companies like RS Regulate and others. It's just the Midwest Industries are the ones that I have the most experience with. And with something like this, I can just slide it onto the side optic rail here. Now this one is sporting a Primary Arms SLX MD25. This, I believe, is their Gen 2 pattern, but this now gives me an optic. So we're already 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and for a lot of people this is going to be their first step, because adding an optic is just going to make your life so much easier from a shooter perspective as far as being able to quickly and accurately engage targets. Now again, with something like this, I can still co-witness with my iron sights, especially if I go with an optic specific mount like the one I have here. But also if I do decide to go back to my irons for whatever reason, or go back to a Niet rifle is fine configuration, I've made no permanent modifications, and it's literally just as easy as popping that little throw lever loose, pulling that off of the gun. Now when it comes to running a light, that's going to be a little bit more complicated potentially. I don't have an example with me, but some options are going to be something like the rail mounts that clamp around the barrel from, I believe it's RS Regulate. That's going to give you a piece of Picatinny rail clamped right around your barrel, just under your gas tube and above your cleaning rod, because you can still run a cleaning rod in this configuration. And that will give you a light that you can activate with your thumb relatively easily. Another option, again, from Midwest Industries. So either of those are going to be something that you can very easily convert from a Niet rifle is fine to a more, in my opinion, adequate fighting rifle. And all of those products are, again, readily available and will work with pretty much any pattern of AK out there. Now, it's worth noting at this point that if you do decide to buy any of the products from Midwest Industries, I do have a discount code that I'll have written on the bottom of the screen, Oregon Trail. That is going to be good for 10% off any Midwest Industries products that you order from their website. Now I do want to talk about the sling here. This is set up in kind of the classic Soviet style. Not exactly ideal by the standards of how people in the West tend to fight with a sling, but it at least gives me a way of attaching this rifle to my body when I need to be doing other things with my hands, or literally doing anything other than shooting or maneuvering. So that is going to be your classic setup. Again, probably the way that most people in the AK world start with. It's definitely the most affordable entry into this, but let's go ahead and move on to something that has a little bit more upgrades. So next up, we're going to be talking about kind of your intermediate version of modernization. Specifically, this is an Arsenal SLR 107 FR. This was actually the first AK that I ever purchased, and it's been running like a champ ever since. I don't know how many thousands of rounds this thing has gone through, and multiple different configurations. Now, as you can see, if you're keeping count, this does have all 3 of the minimum things required with a sling, an optic, and a light. Specifically, we're running one of the Vickers AK slings from Blue Force Gear. We've got a Primary Arms advanced micro dot with a quick disconnect Midwest Industries mount, and then an Arasaka with a Malkov head on a Haley Strategic Thorntail mount. So this gives me still a very lightweight, very handy rifle that's going to give me all of those force multipliers like an optic and a light, without having to necessarily go crazy with upgrades. Now, one of the other things that this has, and this is something you can add to any of the AK rifles after the fact, is an ALG ACT trigger. Some AKs need aftermarket triggers more than others, as we're about to get to with our fully modernized one, but nonetheless, that is what this thing is running. This is one of the old school AKTs before they had the 2 different versions, and it's been running great. Now, pros of a setup like this is, again, this gives me everything that I want. Oh, and I should also say how I have the optic and light mounted up front. This is on an Ultimac railed gas tube, so that is going to allow me to be able to mount accessories on top of the gas tube area here. That does throw that red dot quite a bit further forward, so as far as optics mounting options, this is going to mean that I can't run anything magnified because of that long eye relief. Now, I do have a scope rail here on the side that came from the factory. However, with this specific setup, this is keeping a still relatively svelte, low profile package without any obscuring to my charging handle if I'm going to do reloads. And again, just something that has worked very, very well for me and is perfectly serviceable. Now, the pros of the setup like this, again, I have everything that I need readily available, and I really only had to change one major thing to get to this configuration, being that railed gas tube. Now, there are other companies since I bought this that have joined into that railed gas tube realm. Again, Midwest Industries, and there are others out there. But again, the Ultimac is what I've just been running on this one for forever. So really with just that one swap of a part, I am now optics ready with a light all attached in an area that makes it easy to use. I can also still, because I've got the quick disconnect mount, if I wanted to run back to irons, I can do that if my dot fails or gets clouded up or something like that. It's just a really fast transformation. Now I am further away from the yet rifle is fine thing, so if I did decide to go back to a classic configuration, this is going to be not as easy to recover from. Now I had to make no permanent modifications, so it would be possible, but it's not just as straightforward as just taking a quick release thing off or just undoing a couple screws. It's a little bit more involved than that. But again, I have a perfectly serviceable fighting rifle, one that I've taken through numerous classes with several thousand rounds through it. Now cons are going to be a little bit more cost, and again, that lack of easily being converted. Those Ultimac dust covers are not necessarily cheap, and neither are the other aftermarket options, I guess, depending on what your standard for cheap is. And again, obviously running a light and an optic, you're gonna be adding initial costs. But again, this is a perfectly serviceable fighting rifle. Now, one of the other things I added that I didn't mention is this Tromix charging handle. This is just something that makes it a lot easier when I'm doing mag changes or anything like that, to be able to just reach up, grab that with very gross motor movement and be able to run that charging handle. Does not get in the way of function at all on this rifle. So that is really good. Also, something that you can't see, this actually has a K&S adjustable gas piston. That's really gonna come to play, especially if you start running suppressed. However, even without running suppressed, I am able to actually tune this rifle to where the recoil is already smoother than it already is with a rifle like this. And then we also added a Hogue pistol grip. That's more of a creature comforts thing, not something that you necessarily have to have, at least not for everyone. Now, moving on to our fully modded out modernized AK. This is a WBP Jack. As far as the rifles pictured so far, this is actually the core rifle has been the thing that's I've had to put more work into than pretty much any other AK that I've owned, as a side note. But this is sporting all of the new Midwest Industries Alpha gear with some other extras added on. So if you haven't seen it, I already did a video breaking down each of these components specifically, but we're just going to be doing kind of a broad overview here to talk about what is different versus your standard AK, and then what that allows us to do as far as force multipliers. Because while we are now talking about light, optics and lights on those first two guns, the main thing that we're losing is the integration of something like night vision. So with a setup like this, we have a couple things here. So we've got a folding stock. Now the Arsenal has a folding stock. I don't generally fold my AK stocks, but that's something that we have an option for. But with a stock like this one from Midwest Industries, I now have an adjustable comb height. That's gonna make it a lot easier to run elevated optics, whether I'm doing it with a red dot for passive night vision aiming, or if I'm running a magnified optic like this Primary Arms Nova, which review coming on this thing soon. So that gives me a lot more versatility than I get in the standard comm block stocks, even the factory folders like that Arsenal there. Sling integration is a lot more simple because now I have quick disconnect slings if I'm trying to use more popular Western slings. Now moving on to the railed dust cover here, the railed dust cover gives me the most versatility when it comes to optics mounting. I have, in this case, again, a low power variable scope. That is something I cannot very easily achieve with either a forward mounted dust cover, railed gas tube, or even those side mounts, because not all the side mount options out there are going to easily integrate running a magnified optic like this one. Now with a good railed dust cover like the one from Midwest Industries or some of the other ones available on the market, you still can disassemble this thing for cleaning. Again, this one is just allowing me to integrate this a little bit more seamlessly and especially a little bit more robustly. This thing has excellent return to zero, has not been a problem at all with this rifle. Now moving forward to the handguard, now this handguard is going to allow us to do a lot of things that I have struggled to do with AKs in the past, namely being mounting a night vision unit in a location that I like to have it. So especially being me, being used to AR-15s, having it in that 12 o'clock position provides a lot of advantages, and that is something that, especially if we're looking at this kind of middle upgrade one, I don't have room for mounting a IR device, especially with having a lower mounted optic, and because of the way that this light mount attaches here, I just don't have any room, especially to mount it to the 12 o'clock. I could try to force it into like a 9 o'clock position, or sorry, 3 o'clock position here on the side, but that's not how I want to run it. So with having this now extended handguard, that also doesn't require me to eliminate the sling loop, which has been an issue with extended handguards that I've looked at in the past. I can now have that IR laser, specifically this is a Purst 4, on that 12 o'clock position, which just makes my holdovers a lot easier. The other thing that this allows me to do is actually mount a light in my preferred position, which is kind of in that 130-ish kind of offset position. On the middle stage one there, I have an issue where I can't have that light mounted on the other side because I have to be able to activate it with my thumb because there's not really a great place to integrate a tape switch. However, on this one, because I have all this rail space, I can have a surefire pressure pad to be able to also activate the light here on the side. So this just gives me all the ergonomic improvements that I'm used to having, again, here in the United States with AR-15s, where I have no want for space to be able to mount things. And in this case, it also facilitates mounting of that railed dust cover. Now, if you didn't want to run a railed dust cover, if you're more of a fan of running the red dot sights, you can get their dedicated optic mounts. So like this one is for Aimpoint micro footprint dot, so like a SIG Romeos, the primary arms micro dots, any style of dot like that. I'm also not having to worry about return to zero with opening and closing of a dust cover or changing out any of the internal parts to make that dust cover work. I can also save a little bit on weight versus something like that, along with having the ability to co-witness with my iron sights, assuming I'm not mounting a light or a laser in the 12 o'clock position in front of that. So you have a lot of versatility with this handguard, and presumably only more optic mounts to come. They even have a railed version if you wanted to run just kind of a universal red dot mount at the back, or again with this dedicated mount, I can select this thing a lot lower and have that absolute lower co-witness available to me. So the pros of a setup like this should hopefully be pretty obvious, but it gives me the most force multipliers available on, like with especially having that night vision now integrated into the system, and especially with that rail dust cover allowing me to now run magnified optics or taller optics for passive night vision aiming with things like red dots. I can run a red dot and a magnifier. It just gives me something that I haven't been able to do on either of the rifles that we've talked about so far. So it definitely gives you the most versatility to have force multipliers included, and if folding a stock is an exciting prospect to you, again, something like this Midwest Industries Alpha stock is excellent, but especially adding now that comb height adjustment, I can make pretty much any optic system work, and especially with that adjustable length of pull, even getting that eye relief perfect. Now the drawbacks to something like this, first one is going to be weight. This is going to be significantly heavier than any of the rifles that we've looked at, but that's also just the reality of adding force multiplication tools like magnified optics and IR devices. So that's just kind of par for the course. It's the same way when you start adding stuff like that to AR-15s over just a lightweight red dot and light. And also cost. This is definitely going to be the most expensive way to set up a rifle. Again, that's going to also be the same with an AR-15 when you start adding all those force multipliers, lightweight free flow handguards, et cetera, et cetera. Not saying that this is free flow, but on an AR-15, it's just going to come with cost and weight. So something to take into consideration, and a lot of it's going to come down to what your particular use is with your rifle. If you're talking about having something that's more of just a fun range toy that you might want to double into a self-protection role, something like the Niet rifle is fine, with the option of adding those force multipliers should you want it, is fine. If you're talking about something that's actually going to be a dedicated fighting rifle that you would want to trust your life to, having a setup like this allows you to do that without having to invest a ton of money into it and still having something lightweight, svelte, and easy to use. Or if you really want to squeeze the most performance out of your gun as possible and you're willing to go to the gym so that you can accommodate that extra weight and maybe work some extra hours at work so you can afford the extra cost, something like this full alpha setup is going to be a really good option. Now, obviously, depending on what your roles are, what your needs are, it's going to change, again, what system might be ideal for you, but this hopefully was an opportunity to give you guys some food for thought, let you see some of the options available on the market, because when I first started getting into AKs, when I got this one over 10 years ago now, the AK market in the United States was not the AK market it is now. There's a ton of products that have come out since I started getting into AKs, and that is only giving us more and more options as end users to find something that's gonna work for us. Everything from being able to mount suppressors in a pretty seamless way with adjustable gas pistons, to just full modernized kits that are made here in the US. It's just a really nice thing. And also, one other cool thing that is more and more available on the market is something that does this, a last shot hold open follower. Now, we can argue about the merits of whether or not you want your AKs to hold open on the last round fired. Generally, I think that it's valuable to know when my gun is empty without having to pull the trigger first. And even if you don't have like the Yugo pattern mags that have that built in, there are options from companies like Weapon Tech that allow you to pretty much modify any existing magazine to be able to hold open on the last shot. And again, I think that is a value added thing, something that is also a relatively inexpensive mod to your existing magazines, assuming that they use a ComBlock style follower or a follower that can be removed, unlike the one from US Palm here. So even the Bakelite magazine that is in the BFT here, you can even modify these to take those Weapon Tech hold open followers. And again, just a bunch of cool options on the market that make these tools a lot more viable as a primary fighting option. Not to say that they weren't before, but it's a lot easier to justify to me when I get most of the same features. Let me try this again here. Most of the same features. The base rifle to this has been giving me a ton of issues. About half of my mags wouldn't even fit when I first got it. I've had to do a lot of filing. Anyway, gives you a lot of features that we expect in the 21st century that we find ourselves in now. There's a reason that a lot of the guns you see overseas are at least in a configuration like this, if not a configuration like this, because of the modern battlefield and what we find ourselves in. And I know some of you may be thinking, hey, we're just civilians, we don't need that stuff, but I would rather have every advantage available to me if we're talking about defense of my life, my family, or protection of my nation against a tyrannical government, which is definitely the whole intent of the Second Amendment to begin with. And having those force multipliers just makes it a lot more likely that you'll be able to go home and see your family at the end of the night. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and throw that in the comment section down below. I'll try to get back to you as quick as I can. I at least read every comment, if not respond to as much as I can. If you would like to support the channel, there are various ways of doing that. You can pick up shirts linked down below. You can also support me over on Patreon. The money over there gets fed directly back into the channel. We do things like live streams. We do hopefully giveaways here pretty soon. And also because of the support I get over there, I also post all my content over there early. So if that sounds interesting to you or you just want to financially support the channel, I would definitely appreciate that. Again, if you're looking at any of the Midwest Industries products that we talked about in this video or other stuff that you want to pick up, definitely use that coupon code for 10% off your Midwest Industries products. And then also I want to give a shout out to my buddy James over at Factory 47. If you're into AKs at all, you definitely need to check out their stuff. If you are a brand whore, like I am kind of a sucker for Bulgarian AKs, although the modern stuff coming into the country, maybe not so much. You can get your own Circle 10 shirts or jackets or tumblers, and you can let everyone know what your favorite type of AK is out there. So again, I hope that this video gave you some food for thought. As always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.